Thanks, everybody. So about a decade ago, a professor called me and he said, "Where's Zack Parisa?" And besides saying I don't know, he and I were going to school together at the Yale School of Forestry, and we were in the same class. In fact, we were in the same house. And I hadn't seen him in a few weeks. He would scuttle out of his room, make some toast, disappear back into his lair working on some project. And we weren't sure what that involved. It was something about remote sensing and satellites and measuring trees from space in Armenia. So we were a little worried about him. "Tell Zack," the professor told me, "that if he doesn't turn in his final paper, he's not going to graduate." So I delivered the message. He did graduate, and in fact, he did just fine. The project he was working on turned into an algorithm that was so precise it could measure the species, the size, and the number of trees from space using free remote sensing data. That was unprecedented at the time. And since then, he's actually started a company called Natural Capital Exchange, or NCX. It is the largest developer of forest carbon projects in the US, and it counts among its investors Mark Tursek, the former CEO of the Nature Conservancy, Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff, and produces credits for everyone from JP Morgan to Microsoft. But his real claim to fame is that he appeared on national television on the new show with John Oliver. So let's roll that tape.
On some level, you probably know carbon offsets are bullshit, both because you're a reasonably intelligent person and because you know exactly what show you are watching right now. I don't open my beak to squawk out good news. This thing pops open for sad news and porridge, and I'm all out of porridge right now. And with the market for carbon offsets increasing, there are now companies actively recruiting almost anyone who has a tree to get in on the action. Firms like these are in the business of finding small landowners and connecting them with companies who pay them not to cut down their trees, pitching themselves with ads like this one from NCX.
We're in a critical decade for the climate, and forests are a powerful natural solution for removing carbon from the atmosphere. NCX's forest data scientists developed the first high-resolution forest map of every acre of America. Now, every landowner and every acre of forest can be part of the climate solution.
Right, basically, they will pay you to leave your trees alone, which is a pretty good deal, as it should be easy not to cut down trees. Unless, of course, we're talking about this one, because honestly, fuck this tree. It has at least 7 different eyes, teeth, and it seems to be vomiting up a bush. You look like the Giving Tree if all it gave you was nightmares and was written by H.P. Lovecraft. I hate this tree.
All right. MJ, thank you for the introduction. I'm scuttling up. If that would somehow help with it. I thought he was going to do a little rendition of the scuttle, but he just used the word. And thank you, John Oliver, for that introduction. My name is Zack Parisa. I'm the CEO of NCX, and I work with, I guess, a vice, which I'm learning now, which is carbon offsets. And so John, if you watch the whole thing, he got a couple of things right about carbon offsets. There definitely needs to be more accountability in that sector. We definitely need to work harder on getting the measurements right and making sure that it's working really well and that there's trust in the market. But he gets a lot wrong too. What he gets wrong is the wholesale condemnation of this, the categorization of carbon offsets as vice is wrong. When he calls it bullshit, he's wrong. Carbon offsets, forests in general, I'm going to speak mostly about forests right now, or actually all about forests right now. They are not the solution to climate change. We are not going to forest our way out of climate change. We have to change the entire economy. That lunch that we had today, that was connected to tractors that burned diesel. There's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because we all gathered here today. We're responsible for that, and that's going to stay in the atmosphere basically until the end of time, well past 100 years. It lasts forever at some concentration until it's removed. And it is going to take us a while to transition the economy, a long time. We cannot and will not snap our fingers and stop every internal combustion engine. If we did that, people would starve in the streets. It'd be zombie land. People would freeze to death in their homes. And that is not the just transition to a decarbonized economy that we need. Forests aren't the solution overall to climate change, but they are the ambulance ride to the hospital. They are the thing that is scalable right now that we can work with all over the world to create the positive change that we need. So calling these things bullshit would be like somebody standing out in 1903 pointing at this and be like, this is bullshit. No passengers, super dangerous, what's the point? This is garbage, right? No, this was the start of something really incredible. Carbon offsets are also the start of something really incredible. Up until now, despite the fact that everybody knows that forests are worth more than just what you can cut down and wheel away, we have failed to measure and pay for all of the benefits of forests. And I'm talking about carbon sequestration, which we need right now en masse. I'm talking about biodiversity. I'm talking about social well-being and water, fire risk reduction, all of these things that are connected to the forests that were cut down to make all the things that were grown in mind sort of around us right here. But we have not yet valued all of those things meaningfully. Carbon offsets were the first flight into that. It's this, if it were manifest as something physical, it would look something like this, rickety, like ramshackle, right? But it is also brilliant. It is also the start of something incredible, something where we can incorporate these values into our economy. And when we do that, we can create a world where we exit this century in far better shape than where we found it. This is the path to fixing capitalism. And it is hard. Why is it hard? Why is this so hard? Seems pretty straightforward. You grow a tree, it pulls down carbon, no big deal, right? The problem is trust. So MJ mentioned that I worked in Armenia. These are some people that I worked with. They are about to go plant some trees in a place that had been cut down a little while ago. Those trees next to them, they might cut those down soon and burn those for heat, for cooking. And so we can pay them, we are, to go plant some trees. Those trees are going to pull down some carbon. That's going to create a benefit for you and for me, for everybody. It's a benefit to them to get paid. And so then what happens? You're going to get an email, maybe from me, has this picture. It says, don't worry about it. You paid some money. There's carbon out of the air. You might think, wait a minute. Is that bullshit? Who are these people? Where are they? Where is this tree? What's happening? It comes down to measurements. The thing is, no one is taking physical delivery of these assets. And I'm talking about biodiversity. I'm talking about the carbon grown in these trees. And that's the challenge. It comes down to trust. How do we know? How do we know? How do we know if we can trust these people? And so you have to believe three things. The first is you need to believe a forecast about the future state of that forest. Were they actually going to plant those trees without the payment? The second thing you need to know is a measure of what happened at that future date. Are the trees actually still there? And the third thing you need to know is the duration of time that that carbon was stored. And with that, you could know whether it's bullshit or not. That's the path. And so in a moment, here we go. And so when he talked about me cloistered up in a room, and it was a long time, but I was working on measurements to make these markets fly, to make them fly better than they had before. There already existed the right flyer, but I wasn't saying bullshit. I said, this is amazing. We need to improve upon this, and we can do something far better. And so this is Eleanor. She lives in Alabama. She has a small patch of property. She is unwilling to sign a contract into perpetuity for 100 years, but she is willing to be paid to cut her trees down, to cover her taxes, and she's willing to be paid to grow her trees longer to pull down more carbon. Should we pay her? The answer is yes, we should, because that is exactly what we need right now, less carbon in the atmosphere. How much should we pay her? Well, what was the forecast? What's the state? And how long can she hold that carbon out of the atmosphere? With that assurance, we can know how much benefit she's created for all of us and how we can pay and make that happen. And the good news is that there are billions of people in this world that can grow forests longer and plant trees. This is something that we can do a lot of right now when we need it most. As we are working our asses off to decarbonize the economy, as we are investing in robots that can pull CO2 out of the sky and put it into the ground, this is the thing that we have in hand. This is a thing that connects to communities, to biodiversity, and that's massively scalable. So we opened up a market to do exactly that, to pay landowners just like Eleanor to grow their forests longer. And it's been incredible, the scale at which we've been able to grow additional carbon, to hold that out of the sky. This is not the solution to climate change. This is the ambulance ride to the hospital. This is the thing that allows us to get to the decarbonized economy that we need to get to. This is not bullshit. This is something that we all need to invest in together and innovate in to make sure that we are consistently doing it better. From 1903 to 1969, that's not a long period of time to go from the first time we could fly off the ground under power to landing a person on the moon. We can exit this century in far better shape than we found it, but we are going to have to work in all aspects, and we are going to have to do far better than just calling things bullshit that aren't quite developed. And so here we are, two roads diverge. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood. And sorry we couldn't take both. No, two roads diverge here. So we can either wait for the perfect. We can bet the farm on like hopeful technology, and say that like nature-based solutions for us, that's bullshit. All I want to do is get the robot pulling air or pulling CO2 out of the sky. All I want to do is transition the economy, which we must do. Or we can look at this for what it is, not the solution, but an integral part of our path to the complete solution here. And that's what I would ask you all to consider and to think about and to do, to invest in these kinds of activities, to invest in forests and communities and biodiversity, recognizing it for what it is. It is a path to a future that we can all believe in. Thank you. All right, and so yeah, you get some Q&A as well. we can go back to two roads diverge.
Something idyllic.
Yeah, something pretty. The forest again.
So how did you feel being on national television for the first time?
How did I feel about being on national television? So simultaneously glad, because John Oliver, like the week before this was Afghanistan, and the week after was inflation. I've been working on this for a long time. A lot of us have been working on this for a long time, and to have that level of exposure, for this to be in the conversation the way that it is, I was glad. And I was simultaneously sad because I felt like I have failed to tell to tell the story well enough that even a British comedian could understand it. But and I have to believe there's some German word for sad and glad at the same time. I don't know what it is, but there's bound to be one. So yeah, those two.
That's great. So just tell, I think, a little bit about exactly what it is that you can see and how you can see it. So as I understand it, you have a map of every square kilometer or even less of the entire United States, if not more.
Yeah, so every acre, and actually a little bit smaller than that, but that's we've compartmentalized, we've boxed the entire nation's forest into an area about the size of this room, maybe just a little bit smaller. So lots of little boxes, and within that box, we have a little database that has records for the number of trees and their sizes and species, and there's imprecision around that. We don't have perfect information, and so we have lots of replicates of that show the imprecision, and so it is a map of all the trees, and so expanding that now to Mexico, Canada, and seeing more globally.
And how do you get that level of detail?
Right. So satellite imagery. So we use a lot of data from a lot of different sources. So images, but by themselves, those images we don't know what they mean. So we collect a lot of ground measurements on a lot of properties, like Eleanor's, to train those models. So lots of AI, lots of tools that we didn't have 15 years ago when these things first started.
You're like the Hubble telescope of forests.
I was going to talk to could we turn it around? Could we rotate it around? And I don't think he'll do it. It's probably pretty far down on the list.
So what was the moment in between making toast that you realized that this actually could work?
I
was a little skeptical when you first explained it to me.
I'm an optimist. These markets will work. They will, and because we need them, and necessity is the mother of invention. And so, when did I know it would work? There were like little glimmers, and you work your ass, like you pound away in some lab, and eventually you just see iterative improvement. And I think that's really, seeing little hopeful things. And so there wasn't like a moment like, eureka, this works. It was first conceptually it should work, theoretically, then works a little bit better, and then enough information. But what's important to understand is that the quality of those measurements, those forecasts, they are what make it possible or impossible to transact on top of these things. It's the sort of the gradient of bullshit to real. If the measurements, those forecasts that I was talking about like in Armenia, would they have planted if we didn't pay them? If you aren't sure, then you're not sure that real value was created. And so really it's just, when did we get enough information to where you could transact on it? When was the grocery store scale good enough that everybody felt confident you could measure and pay there?
So yeah, let's get into that a little bit, because I think it's still not intuitive for a lot of people. So first, when you mentioned the idea that pulling carbon out of the atmosphere with trees, not on a permanent basis, quote unquote, for 100 years, but on a temporary basis, what is the math behind that makes that valuable in the short term? Because it sounds like that carbon will be released potentially in the next 5, 10, or longer years.
Well, it may. So here's the deal. So that lunch we ate, again, carbon was related to that. It went into, like, tractor goes across a field. We had some apples, I think. I enjoyed mine, some of it. So, trucks are moving that around. CO2 goes into the sky. That's going to stay there forever as far as we understand it. About 30% of it stays there. The other 70% sort of falls out into the oceans eventually, and might get locked up in some terrestrial spaces. And so when we talk about permanence, like when we talk about actually fixing this, a lot of the discussion is around how do we get this back into geologic carbon? How do we put it back into the Earth's crust? But what we know is that any amount of time that we can pull CO2 out of the atmosphere reduces damage to society. And those emissions, we know that they cause damage to society long into the future generations, long after everyone in this room is gone.
That damage is essentially a function of the ability for that gas to hold heat, is that right? That's
right, yeah, exactly. So it warms the earth, it causes floods, like what we've seen in Pakistan. It causes more intense hurricanes. Sandy, I guess, was 10 years ago to the day. Today, is that even, I think, something like that. Someone told me that. That's the damage of climate change. That's what we're talking about, and that stretches long into the future. And so when we think about the current, like the cost today of that damage, we know also that if we pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, even for short periods of time, that creates a benefit to society. It reduces the damage even in the short term. And so with that understanding, we can pay landowners, we can pay that community in Armenia for however long they can hold CO2 on that property with those trees. And they can't promise forever. Trees burn down. They die because of insects. And what we can't do is saddle those communities with liability truly forever. And that's the difference. That's why it's not bullshit. It's just different than something like a robot that can put CO2 into the Earth's crust.
So right now, where do you see the market going? I feel like I've seen ups and downs over the last 10 years, and it's been written off and then revived, and I don't know where we are today, somewhere between written off and revived. Yeah. What do you predict?
Okay, so I started this company 13 years ago, and there was this little blip of interest in carbon. There might be markets, and then there really weren't. And they started rising just a little bit, but what's different now is banks, businesses, like they're basically fully invested in this coming market. And the public narrative is fundamentally different. Things like this show up on John Oliver, unbelievably, and I'm glad. And so my prediction is it is going to be a little chaotic to start as we all try and understand what actually constitutes quality and benefit. And that's going to take some period of time, but we had better accelerate that, because what we do this decade matters. What we do this decade is going to set the realm of possible for the next generation, and really even for the next 30 years. So my prediction is a little bit of noise and then a lot of progress.
So it's easy to write this off, as you said, and I think there are good projects and good plans and bad ones, and where that line is, it's a little hard to say right now. But to give people a sense, I think we know what a bad offset looks like, maybe a bad commitment. There are a lot of those out there. What does a good one look like? A good commitment for corporate emission reductions, which some people would consider this to be an indulgence of sorts, and then a good offset itself.
Yeah, I'll work backwards. So it's not an indulgence. Was our lunch an indulgence? Perhaps. But again, we're not going to snap our fingers and stop all internal combustion engines. We could, and we won't. We could do it, and we won't do it because the damage that that would cause society would be, there we go, would be massive. Okay, back to that. Would be massive. And if we do nothing, we recognize that the damage to society would be massive. And somewhere in the middle is that just transition. And so the right path, if you see a company and they're investing in things that may not work, that's not greenwashing. That's people taking a chance to try and create the future that we all actually need. Most of these people, they're new to this as well. They don't know a whole lot about forests or robots or how to decarbonize the factory that they have. They're trying to do it, and many of them are well-intentioned and trying to do it quickly. And so it is going to be it is going to be investments in all of those. And it is going to be heavy investments in the things that are rapid in pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere right now, so that we are in a good place and we're creating options, good options for ourselves 10 years, 30 years in the future, for future generations that are going to inherit what we hand them at the end of this century.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.